Thank you very much, Margaret. Where I would want to focus is on what I would call the new policy environment. Now, in order to get there, first, policy about what? And the major context I think we're dealing with is on how to build or strengthen capacity in countries where capacity is weak. We don't particularly care on strengthening capacity where it's already strong, although those who are there are continuously caring to renew that strength. And within that context of building or strengthening capacity, the issue is what role for mobility. And the overall answer is mobility has always been important and will continue being important, increasingly important for strengthening capacity. But mobility has many faces. So we have to deal with mobility as a good and bad thing at the same time, to put it in simplistic terms. Now, the new context is one of increased mobility, increased forms of mobility. Mobility of people, ideas, programs has been facilitated, but also we deal with a context of enhanced competition. Enhanced competition between individuals and the market, between programs and institutions, for resources, for people, and more so competition among nations. The highly competitive international environment has been there all the time. It's nothing new, but it has increased in the last couple of decades, mainly with what we call the knowledge society and the knowledge economy. In this highly competitive environment, higher education is part and parcel of that. We know that there's a highly competitive environment for higher education institutions, for programs, for research programs, for teaching programs, to get more funds, to get better students, to get the best scholars in the world. So the question is, how in this highly mobile, highly competitive environment can we think about policy frameworks that still can address the issue of building and strengthening capacity in those areas, regions of the world, nations or parts of nations where that capacity is weaker, and there are possibilities of strengthening that. In some areas, maybe there's none. Mainly when we deal with doctoral education, we have to realize that doctoral education is not for everybody, it's not going to grow everywhere, and it's no need to have doctoral programs in every little corner of the world. So there are limits to that. In this new policy framework, there are, I think, only a few principles on which we might want to agree. The one first and most important one for me is that it is always a contentious issue. It is never straightforward at any level. It is not only in the receiving countries, it's also in the sending countries. I don't know of any single case of sending countries where there is only one mind about what is best for that country in terms of mobility. If you see how those who return are received with mixed feelings, you know what I mean. So first of all, it is contentious. Second, it takes place at very different levels, and those levels must be addressed. I think that most recently, the regional level has become very important, particularly in the European Union, but we do have other examples of policy making at a regional level, which is very usually in confrontation more than aligned with national policies. National policies are very important, but not all nations behave in the same way. Some of them are highly decentralized in their decision making, and there is no it to it. There's no place where you can really find who makes decisions. In other cases, it's more centrally located. But also there is the institutional level. So these are different levels where you can address different kinds of decisions. Yet, at any and all of these levels, there might be contentious issues, and not only between levels, but within levels. Yet I think we find there are some new elements in this paradigm, perhaps, that are worth underlying. First is, Margaret was referring to that, greater consideration of individual behavior. Academics are individuals like anybody else. They behave like anybody else. We have to understand their behavior, their ambitions, their career patterns, and to what kind of incentives they actually respond. And all style repatriation programs, all style taxation programs, and so on, partially don't work because they are not sensitive enough to how people behave. And how people behave is related not only to their academic careers, but to other things in life. Second principle is that we acknowledge that there is a variety of individual contributions to the collective good. They may contribute by their presence, by their ideas, by their money, by their innovations, and so on and so forth. And those contributions can happen not, I would say, independently of where they are, but not strictly tied to location. Today, we tend to think of people contributing to different kinds of settings. They may be more than one organization, or they may contribute to their organization partially traveling around and teaching students elsewhere, and so on and so forth. But I think that more important, those contributions have to take into account another important element of their individual behavior or organic condition, namely their identities. All migrants, we know from migration literature, keep multiple identities. And most policy frameworks that deal with academic mobility and how they are going to place incentives have to take into account individuals' identities, starting with their language, started with the national commitments that are very often extended over time. The children or grandchildren of migrants do keep that identity. And time and again, we have found that relevant in the migration literature and the academic literature, we will find it again. Last but not least, I think that any kind of policy framework has to come to terms with the idea of this multiple decision making. And for our group and a number of other groups like ours, the most important thing is who can we influence. And I think that one level that we normally don't address is the academic level. We tend to blame governments, international organizations, but very little our own homes. And by homes, I mean institutions and academic communities, both in receiving and in sending countries. And I would like specifically to put my finger to one of them, not because it's the main responsible, but because it's so well represented here, namely the academic cultures and institutions in the stronger countries, in those that have greater capacity for doctoral training, and what is their actual practices and not rhetoric about academic mobility and about training doctoral students and receiving of international scholars. I think that they have had more of a responsibility for this kind of mixed picture. Yes, we want to contribute to the global good, but we have our local conditions and incentives to compete with each other, and these are kinds of issues we have to address. I'm sorry it took me longer than expected as usual.